Hello, gathered friends. I'm Horror Nuva, and welcome back to Bionicle Deep Dive, where we analyze the tropes, characters, and lore of LEGO Bionicle. Something that's always fascinated me about Bionicle is the unique ways in which the story was presented. In particular, in this video, I want to look at how being a LEGO toy brand and building its story around the release of the sets shaped the pacing and structure of Bionicle's plot. So, LEGO is a toy company first and foremost, and the Bionicle story served as a means to get people into the toys. And much like how a good video game will interweave its story with its gameplay mechanics, a good story-driven toy line will interweave its story with its toys in a way that complement and enhance each other. In Bionicle's case, where they had a long-lasting, plot-based narrative, the trick was getting the release of the toys to match the important beats of the story. One major part of this balance was LEGO's set release schedule. LEGO released their major themes in yearly lines. As such, story arcs for Bionicle were paced out for each year, starting in January and wrapping up its plot threads that fall, just in time to set for next year's plot, much like how TV shows are released in seasons, with each season being a story arc. Additionally, the yearly releases were split into two waves, first in the winter and the second one in the summer, with each wave containing a different group of characters for that year's story. Since Bionicle was an action figure line, the toys were of the characters, and so the main story of the year centered around the characters who were released as sets. With each release, that was essentially LEGO premiering the major characters for this arc. As such, the plot had to be paced so that it was in time with when LEGO released the relevant characters. It was also very interesting because it meant that going into each arc, even before the plot actually began, we had a solid list of the main characters, what they looked like, and a small synopsis on their personality and powers. Very useful for keeping track of the loads and loads of characters who might be harder to remember while also trying to keep track of the plot. And weirdly enough, it also enhanced the experience of characters who created without sets associated with them. The author Greg Farsty, for example, would add several of his own characters throughout the books, and since they weren't premiered beforehand, they made excellent curveballs to the plot and added an inherent air of mystery to them. There were three main classes of Bionicle sets released throughout the year: the small box sets, the medium-sized canister sets, and the large box sets known as Titan sets. The class of each set was a pretty good guide to the role and prominence of the character. The canister sets always had the main central characters for the year. They were the ones that sold the best since they were always very satisfying, decently sized toys, but still relatively reasonably priced. Usually there were two waves of canister sets, split between the winter and summer, one containing the main heroes and one containing the main villains of that year. The small box sets were often the minor supporting characters, usually either Matorn or Taraga. They were the characters who filled the role of the mentors or sidekicks to the main heroes in the canister sets. The small sets were usually released in the first half of the year, which worked out pretty well. Since they were usually the closest to regular people, they did a good job of fleshing out the world and the setting. And then there's the large box Titan sets, which were large, powerful characters who came in to really shake up the plot. They were often either boss-type villains or exceptionally powerful allies of the Toa. The types of characters who were very significant to the plot, but not the main characters. Fitting for sets that were large and impressive, but somewhat expensive and complex to build, so not everyone would get them. The large sets were usually released in the second half of the year to change up the status quo, though there were exceptions where they were shown in the first half. While the small and large sets were usually pretty consistent in the timing of their release, it was the release order of the canister sets that really made the difference, as there were two canister waves released each half of the year, one containing the main heroes and one containing the main villains. The order in which the sets were released, and therefore the order these characters enter the story, obviously play a huge role in how the plot progresses. And it's very interesting the ways in which this was used to shape the narrative and tension of the story. Many of the early years, for example, had the heroes come first and then the villains come out to challenge them later, but sometimes this was reversed or played with for the sake of the story. For example, both 2006 and 2007 released the villains first alongside the small box sets of Matoran. And so, in both these years, the early part of the story centered around the villagers of each island struggling to survive against the onslaught of villains with no Toa around to save them. Additionally, this allowed the early part of the year to really explore the new setting, as we were now focusing on the regular Matoran and their lives and homes instead of just the Toa. I've always believed that Bionicle and honestly all fantasy world stories work best when the regular people of the setting are given at least some time to shine. It gives depth to the world and gives the audience a real concrete understanding of the people and the heroes are trying to fight and protect. Without that, the hero's motivation to save people can sometimes feel hollow and abstract. Additionally, 2006 and 7 were some of Bionicle's thematically darkest years, and they really took advantage of the villains preying on helpless villagers dynamic in the first part of the year to really amp up feelings of despair and narrative tension. The plot points of both these years were paced such that there was a distinct darkest hour for the Matoran, just in time for the summer release, when the Toa sets would come out, making a very cathartic heroes arrive moment that's just narrative catnip. In particular, 2006 pulled a very interesting bait and switch in the novels. We started off the story with the Paraka invading the island of Voyanui in search of the Mask of Life, with the Toanika arriving in the summer wave to save the island and get the mask. What's interesting is in that the first two books of that arc, Island of Doom and Dark Destiny, the Toanuva, the original heroes, were sent to Voyanui to retrieve the mask and end up battling the Paraka. Since the Tonuva already had their canon sets, we, the audience, already knew what they looked like and could play out the battle ourselves. So at the time, we were very much led to believe that the Toanuva were the heroes of this story. But then they lose. Badly. Twice. And it becomes very clear that the Toanuva aren't going to be able to save the day. But if the Toanuva can't save the day, then who? Boom. Darkest hour, right in time for the premiere of a new wave of sets and a whole new generation of heroes. Also, can I just say that the arrival of the Toanika at the end of the Dark Destiny is one of my favorite moments in the entire series. I could and probably will do a whole separate video on it. Greg Farsi brought his absolute A-game writing to that scene, and it's just so chilling and cathartic, equal parts grim and hopeful, and really brought the hype that that moment needed as the lovable side characters prepare to take on the mantle of true heroes. But back to the topic of set releases shaping the plot. 2008 did a very interesting subversion, where instead of having one wave be all heroes and the other be all villains, they split the heroes and villains equally in each wave. This way, each wave had 3 heroes and 3 villains, so the conflict in the story could start right away. In this story, the explanation was having the heroes split up, and while each set wave was released, the story focused on each location. Liwa, Kopaka, and Pohatu in the skies above Kardanui, and Onua, Tahu, and Gali down in the swamp beneath, before having them come together in the finale that fall. By releasing them like that, the story was not only able to jump right into a hero versus villain battle, but also explore the unique team dynamics of the Toa while they were split into these groups. It also created an air of mystery and anticipation, for while we were focusing on one half, we were wondering what was happening to the other. Just another way in which the story team utilized the release of sets as a springboard to write interesting stories. This has been our look at how LEGO, being a toy company with a distinct release schedule, shaped and structured Bionicle plotlines. It's always pretty cool to see the creative and artistic ways media can work around and with the constraints put on them, and even use them as a structure to which to build amazing stories. Anyways, my gathered friends, that's all for today. Take care. I'll see you guys next time.